Three teenagers, Ava, Leena, and Noah, set out on a clear Yosemite morning and did not return. Their camp was found intact, food sealed, stoves cold, sleeping bags uncreased. The hikers themselves were missing. For their families, time slowed to a vigil measured in unanswered calls and unspent plans. Inside the park, the file stayed open, its tabs worn by hands that kept checking what little could be checked. 9 years later, a scanner registered a pattern that had once flickered at the edges of the original search. Three short bursts, three long, three short, an SOS cadence aligning to the early window when teams first swept the canyon. The match did not promise a voice, only a reason to reopen a trail of facts. This reconstruction follows the case the way professionals followed it then, through dispatch logs that mark the hours, camera EXIF data that fixes light to place, map overlays that test routes against terrain, hydrophone audio that carries tap signals through water, and evidence notes that hold the small textures, mica on a strap, a knot on a length of cord, soot on a reflector stone. Each step adds one verified piece, nothing more. No dramatization is needed. The mountains provide setting enough. The record provides the rest. The aim is clarity for the families and accuracy for anyone who walks these trails and wonders how quickly a stray plan can turn. The sequence begins where the pattern returned and the work resumed. Listeners will hear what search teams heard. The patrol began like countless others, boots on granite, radio clipped, eyes on the ridgeline above Tenaya Canyon. Morning light filtered thin through lodgepole pines, the air cool enough to carry sound farther than usual. Unit 12 log position at 7:18, a routine marker on a quiet shift. For nearly an hour, the scanner held nothing but static, then the ordinary crackle of other teams checking in. At 8:07, the channel cut sharp with three short bursts. A pause, then three long. Another pause, followed by three short again. The sequence was not chatter, not interference, but deliberate rhythm, SOS. The operator called it in, noting time, coordinates, and bearing. The line entered the log like any other entry, but the tone and dispatch carried weight. This was not the first time the pattern had been heard in this canyon. An archived transcript from 2016 recorded the same cadence, faint, irregular, almost dismissed as anomaly during the initial search for Ava, Leena, and Noah. Back then, it was logged but never confirmed, absorbed into the background of theories that rose and collapsed as days turned into years. Families asked about it every anniversary, wondering if it mattered, if someone had tried to call across stone and water while search teams moved only yards away. The memory of those calls lingered. 9 years had passed, yet parents still rang the ranger station each October. Their voices asked if anything new had surfaced, if any corner had yielded a trace. The official answer remained cautious, but the unofficial one was simpler. The park never stopped listening. Now the same rhythm returned, carried through the canyon once more. The note entered into fresh files matched the earlier cadence window exactly. The record of that morning begins not with silence, but with an image. At 8:43 a.m., the device assigned to Ava Hayes captured a selfie of three figures standing at the gravel pull-out where the paved road thins into dirt. Behind them, the wooden trail marker, weathered by decades of storms. In front, packs loaded, shoes laced, a horizon of blue promising miles of walking. Ava held the phone, her arm extended, eyes narrowed in the sun. To her right, Leena Rodriguez, her braid neat, map tube clipped at her hip. To her left, Noah Carter, shoulders lifted in mock bravado, fingers flashing a crooked peace sign. The photograph would later circulate in every briefing, a frozen declaration of confidence at the trailhead. The metadata told its own story. The EXIF timestamp logged 8 hours, 43 minutes, 17 seconds. Yet the sun's angle in the photo, analyzed against ridgeline position, suggested 8:36. A small gap, but enough for investigators to flag the device clock as altered. Whether by accident, by battery reset, or by deliberate adjustment, the record no longer aligned cleanly with natural time. The plan that morning was precise. A loop was plotted, 6 miles on marked trail, then a shift onto a connector used decades earlier by climbers. From there, the route would arc back toward Tenaya Canyon, a triangle that promised 3 days of solitude and a return to the same pullout before dark on the third evening. The gear list was complete: water filters, stove kits, SATCOM for scheduled check-ins. Nothing suggested neglect. Then came the anomaly. Forensic recovery of the device revealed a burst entry deleted minutes after the selfie. 4 rapid shots, blurred by movement. Shadows at frame edge, an arm half raised, expressions no longer composed. The images were unrecoverable in full, but the log preserved their existence. Something, seen or heard, had triggered Ava to raise the phone again. What prompted the sudden burst at the trailhead remains unknown, but the fact of its deletion stood out as the first disruption in a carefully prepared plan. The first day's journey ended where Hazel Creek widened into a clearing shaped by old floods. It was a natural campsite. Level ground, wind protection from stands of laurel, and flat stone for cooking. When search teams reached the spot 2 days later, the scene told a story no one expected. 2 tents were standing, guy lines taut, rainflies clipped. A third, smaller shelter sat on a slight rise, its door flap zipped as if waiting for its occupant to return. Inside, sleeping bags were unrolled, uncreased. Food had been stored in bare canisters, sealed and set apart exactly as the park rules required. The stoves lay cold, pots clean, fuel canisters still capped. Nothing about the camp suggested panic, waste, or neglect. One detail broke the order. The rainfly on Ava's tent bore a cut, clean, vertical, no fray at the edges. Forensics confirmed the slice had been made by a non-serrated blade, a quick motion rather than a tear caused by strain. The line through fabric suggested exit in haste, a straight reach for open ground. On the ground near the fire ring, a whistle pea was recovered, its hollow chamber packed with fine grit. The pea had rolled into a groove between stones, preserving residue that spoke of water carry. Analysis suggested contact with silt from a creek, the kind collected during hurried movement at night. Someone had used the whistle close to running water, where sound could scatter. Around the perimeter, footprints were clear for several yards, then broke at a rivulet that cut across the path. Stones at midstream bore partial impressions, hill edges, mud smears, but no return marks on the far side. The prints simply ended at water, direction set away from camp, destination unmarked. Search and rescue in Yosemite runs like a board game where every move costs hours and daylight. When Ava, Leena, and Noah failed to check in, the first 48 hours unfolded by protocol. Teams assembled before dawn at the command post, their assignments plotted across a grid that stretched from the marked trail to the first ridges above Tenaya Canyon. Dog handlers entered the sector first, weaving narrow arcs designed to pick up scent cones. Early hits led back to the established campsite, but beyond the rivulet the trails thinned into noise. Water, granite, and wind all conspired to erase what dogs usually found. Helicopters swept overhead with thermal cameras, but under canopy the signal flattened. Moving heat was indistinguishable from sun-warmed stone. The operational map carried bright vectors, each arrow representing a day's push. Sector by sector, ground was walked, flagged, and cleared. But one set of impressions complicated the picture. Upstream from the campsite, well beyond where current should have erased anything, a partial boot heel appeared on a stone ledge. Investigators measured tread depth and angle, consistent with Noah's footwear, yet displaced nearly a mile against the flow. The only explanation, stone hopping across water in darkness, leaving scattered fragments instead of a continuous trail. On the map's edge, a pencil note from an early ranger briefing added another variable. Beside the cleared grids, a margin mark read, "Climber access, unposted." Narrow cut above Tenaya's shoulder. The path was not on visitor maps, its existence kept informal among seasoned locals. Narrow, steep, and seldom used, it led directly toward the sector where, years later, a scanner would again record the SOS pattern. Families reached the park's perimeter before the search grid could fully expand. The staging area filled with vehicles, coolers of donated food, and voices that shifted between forced calm and sudden urgency. Most of what they carried into those days was grief, but some carried details investigators would later treat as evidence. A voicemail from Noah's mother was preserved in the case file. Recorded the night before the trio left, it was short. "Remember to check in at dinner, sweetheart. Even if it's just one line, you know I won't sleep without it." That habit of regular calls was confirmed by friends and teachers, a pattern that made the silence after their departure all the more distinct. Leena's father arrived with a notebook small enough to fit a jacket pocket. Its pages held trail sketches, weather tables, and hand-drawn symbols used to mark planned rest points. One in particular repeated across margins, a cairn with 3 stacked stones, drawn beside a triangle cluster pointing east. He explained that Leena often doodled trail markers in shorthand, a way of imagining routes before walking them. Investigators logged the notebook into evidence and transcribed the shapes for field teams. Days later, a ranger crossing a granite shoulder found an etching no wider than a handspan. The stone bore the same cairn symbol, 3 stacked forms beneath a set of triangles, shallow cut into a flake of granite well off the designated route. Weathering suggested it was recent when first observed, not the work of decades-old carving. The discovery tied family material to field terrain for the first time. A personal habit of doodling had transferred into physical rock, marking a direction not plotted on official maps. Wilderness preserves its own kind of evidence. Not footprints in sand, but the thin transfers of mineral and residue left on gear. When analysts studied the straps from Ava's pack, recovered at the abandoned camp, they noted a tear on the lower webbing. Under magnification, the fibers carried traces of mica, silver bright flecks compressed into the weave. Yosemite granite is widespread, but mica-rich slabs appear only along certain ridgelines. The scuff angles on the fibers indicated upward drag, suggesting the pack had been pulled across stone during ascent rather than fallen from above. Further sampling came from a burn mark near the reflector wall of the secondary camp. Ash residue was collected and compared against regional supply lists. The tablets fueling that fire contained a binder formulation not stocked in the park's concession stores during the year the hikers disappeared. The chemistry matched an overseas lot distributed 2 years later. Either a cache had been placed deliberately, or someone from outside the official loop had resupplied that position after the vanish. Logs also recorded the timing of unusual audio. Each time the scanner picked up the faint SOS rhythm, weather notes showed the same condition: lulls in the wind, short breaks where Tenaya Canyon's cross breezes dropped and sound could travel unbroken. Acoustic modeling later confirmed it. Percussion signals carried better along water channels during these calms than through air above the trees. The fragments aligned, mica traces confirming movement upslope, non-local fuel marking human presence years after the vanish, and signal bursts synchronized with natural pauses in canyon wind. None of it proved who set the fires or tapped the code, but each piece pointed toward ongoing, deliberate activity in the same corridor. The concealed site sat in a wind shadow below a broken rib of granite, invisible from the main approach and quiet even when the canyon gusted. Brush had been trimmed, not hacked, leaving a low tunnel that opened into a pocket no larger than a parking space. Evidence technicians photographed each surface before any item was touched. A reflector wall anchored the camp's center. Fist-sized stones stacked in a shallow arc, their faces darkened by heat. Scorch pattern analysis showed a series of short, intense burns, high temperature for minutes at a time, then complete extinguish. There were no long smears of soot up the stones, no drift staining from lazy smoke. The fire practice suggested discipline: create heat quickly, keep flames low, minimize visible plume, and shut down before air currents shifted. In combination with the wind shadow, the pattern indicated a user who understood how to avoid detection from both line of sight and scent. Paracord lengths were recovered from 2 points. One segment laced through an improvised gear hang, the other coiled beneath a rock lip. The tie-off on the hanger used a not seldom seen in recreational camping. It matched an older style taught in regional search and rescue instruction prior to 2010, a compact variant favored for gloved handling and rapid release under load. The tails were trimmed clean and heat-fused, with ends seated to the lay, another sign of practiced hands. The second coil told a more recent story. Fiber microscopy revealed a surface sheen inconsistent with years of outdoor exposure. Light oil traces, likely skin oils and a plant-based salve, were present along the working bite. Where the cord bent repeatedly, the outer sheath showed fresh compression without UV bleaching. Together, those signals indicated handling well after the original disappearance window. Around the reflector wall, soil compaction mapped footfall patterns. The densest pressure fell on 3 stones set as a triangle just beyond the heat line, the same geometry that appeared in Leena's pocket notebook and again as a shallow etch on granite in the off-route sector. Whether the arrangement served as habit, signal, or simple convenience remained unresolved, but the recurrence connected family material to field practice a second time. No food wrappers or branded packaging were found. Char residue contained the same non-local binder detected earlier, reinforcing the resupply or cache hypothesis. A small scrap of foil, unmarked, had been folded into a wind shroud and then flattened. Its edges bore micro kinks typical of repeated reuse. The camp's placement exploited the topography. A low berm blocked line of sight from the canyon floor. A granite overhang caught and returned heat toward the sitter. From above, the pocket collapsed into brush texture. Thermal detection from the air would have been further weakened by the adjacency of stone and the brief burn windows suggested by the scorch pattern. Documentation concluded with cordage comparison. The knot style from the gear hang, identical to the pre-2010 Air variant, was photographed, measured, and entered into the Thai archive. Later that shift, a short section of cord retrieved near the current SOS locus showed the same dressing and tail length, set with equal precision. Fibers from both samples shared manufacturer characteristics common in commodity paracord, but the knot signature, the human element, aligned. The overall picture was consistent, a secondary camp built to be used briefly, repeatedly, and quietly by someone conversant with rescue culture techniques and concealment. Heat when needed, dark when not. In, out, no trace, but what couldn't be helped. By the time the signal returned, the search teams had shifted tactics. Helicopters and broad sweeps had yielded nothing. Now the canyon was worked with silence. A listening post was established at the creek's bend, where water pooled before vanishing into a tailless slot. Lights were kept off. Radios were carried low against jackets to muffle static. The method was simple. Let the canyon speak. Hydrophones, small instruments normally used for aquatic surveys, were lowered into the current. At first the recordings held only the natural chorus. Stone-to-stone collisions, silt rolling, the white hiss of turbulence. Then, just after midnight, a pattern broke through. 3 beats, pause. 2 beats, longer pause. Then a cluster, irregular but deliberate. The sound did not echo through air. It traveled within water. The percussion carried along the bed of the creek itself. The sequence repeated in intervals across the night, always within the lull between gusts. Analysts charted frequency and spacing, overlaying the graphs against more sequences. Full words never formed, but fragments suggested human cadence. Emphasis, repeat, correction. One stretch included a syllabic rise, almost vocal in rhythm, the pattern approximating a name, drawn out as if someone were calling across stone. While hydrophones worked the channel, a separate find emerged near the listening post. A fabric fragment was pulled from a root snag at the bank's edge. The weave carried dye consistent with a limited-run jacket purchased by Leena's family before the trip. Threads matched retail samples archived in purchase records, linking the material directly to her gear list. Its presence so far downstream suggested movement through water long after the campsite had been abandoned. Taken together, the evidence pointed to intentional signaling routed through the creek itself. The taps were not random shifts in current but repeated percussive strikes, using water as conduit. The fracture above the creek opened into a slot barely wide enough for one person to crawl. Entry required full technical discipline. Helmets fitted with mounted lamps, secondary glow sticks dropped at intervals, and constant line management to mark the return path. Carbon dioxide monitors were clipped to harness straps, their digital tones set low but steady. The order was strict: move, map, mark, never separate. The first chamber widened just enough for three to stand upright. On its wall, scratched into soot and stone, were tally marks. Three at the start, then a gap, then two, then one. The sequence repeated, as though someone had marked the reduction of companions. Beneath the last single stroke, the surface showed multiple overtracings, as if the mark had been cut again and again to keep it visible in low light. Further in, containers were stacked along a ledge, plastic cash cans sealed with duct tape. Labels identified their manufacture date as 2 years after Ava, Leena, and Noah disappeared. One can still held foil-packed rations. Another carried solid fuel tablets identical to the foreign lot detected in earlier burn residue. The timeline broke here. Supplies that could not have been brought in during the original trip, yet sat deep within a chamber tied to the missing hikers. Soot patterns marked the ceiling above a small reflector fire pit, where short, disciplined burns had been used to create light without choking the air. On the opposite wall, a finger-drawn sketch repeated the motif from Leena's notebook. A cairn symbol beneath three clustered triangles, smudged but legible through ash. Its reappearance in this concealed place reinforced the possibility that one or more of the group had reached this chamber. No graffiti of names, no written sentences, only one carved line cut deeper than the rest: up when wind, down when boots. The instructions suggested a system: surface when air carried sound safely, retreat when footsteps threatened. The chamber offered survival, but not welcome. Every mark, every cache, implied deliberate return, yet the sequence of tallies told the opposite: numbers dwindling, presence shrinking, until only one stroke remained. Inside the fracture system, evidence suggested not only concealment but long-term survival. The most telling artifact was a drip-to-canteen rig left in place, a plastic bottle suspended beneath a limestone seam, catching water that condensed and fell drop by drop into a waiting container. The system was crude but effective, requiring only patience and the discipline to rotate vessels before overflow. Nearby, a set of notes scrawled on flattened bark described foraging practices. Lines listed oak seed, leech long, and fern root, roast before chew, shorthand instructions consistent with acorn tannin removal and fern rhizome preparation. These were not random guesses. They reflected knowledge passed through ranger training guides and regional ethnobotany references. To investigators, the overlap raised a question: had someone with SAR background left teaching fragments here, or had the missing learned these skills in advance? The canyon itself explained how evasion was possible. Thermal cameras searching from above had struggled under canopy density, where overlapping pine crowns masked heat signatures. Adjacency to running water further blurred contrast, as wet stone cooled surfaces to near ambient temperature. If someone remained still, moving only in wind lulls, aerial detection would have been nearly impossible. The camp's short burn fire discipline completed the camouflage. Medical assessments were cautious. Any long stay underground carried risks: vitamin deficiency, bone loss, and cognitive strain. Notes on the chamber walls echoed those consequences indirectly: weak bones/cold light, and head noise when no wind. The words suggested awareness of decline without dwelling on detail. One section of soot bore diagrams that resembled ranger training sketches, triangulated search grids, wind arrows, and reminders to mark, rest, hydrate. These fragments unsettled some reviewers. If they were left by one of the missing, the similarity to official pedagogy blurred the line between survivor improvisation and inherited instruction. Toward the rear of the chamber, a scratch map displayed crude topography: a ridge, a cut, and a line upward marked with an X. Notes beside it read: steep/no passive. Investigators matched the drawing to a gully above Tenaya Canyon, a slope known for loose tailless and failed ascents. It was labeled in the case file as a likely attempt at exit, an effort that ended without success. By the 9th year, the case file contained layers of theory and conjecture. Yet when investigators assembled the timeline board, only certain links held under repeat scrutiny. These were the elements that could be proven. First came the EXIF entry, the last photo at the trailhead, its timestamp misaligned with sun angle by several minutes. From there, the cut rainfly marked the first sign of sudden departure, a clean slice no storm could produce. The mica transfer on Ava's torn strap fixed a scent across a specific slab. Fuel residue with a binder unavailable locally confirmed resupply or cache years after the vanish. The paracord knot, identical to an old SAR variant, reappeared both at the concealed camp and again near the renewed signal site. Hydrophone captures traced deliberate percussion carried by the creek during wind lulls. Finally, the tally marks inside the cave chamber, reducing from 3 to 2 to 1, logged a human hand marking absence. Together, these artifacts formed a chain. Not a complete narrative, but a progression: departure, disruption, ascent, concealment, signaling, reduction. Each item stood on verifiable ground. Attention then turned to the current SOS. Field engineers documented the mechanism hidden inside the talus fracture, a mechanical striker mounted against stone, water-fed by a narrow chute. At intervals, when flow reached a set threshold, the device produced a triplet of taps: short, long, short. It was an automatic emitter designed to repeat without direct human contact. The placement was precise. The device sat within the same grid that had been combed during the first weeks of the original search. Its alignment suggested intent to ensure any future patrols would pass within earshot, to leave a breadcrumb not in words, but in rhythm. No further speculation was added to the official board. The evidence stood only where artifacts met analysis, not where memory or motive might tempt extrapolation. Recovery work proceeded without spectacle. Access paths were flagged with minimal disturbance. Tools were wrapped to avoid leaving fresh scars on stone. When the final chamber was opened, technicians documented every surface before a single item was moved. From the sediment under a ledge, storage media fragments were lifted, micro SD and adapter plastic, abraded by time and grit. The pieces were sealed, logged, and transferred to a lab with capacity for deep carve retrieval. The image that returned was partial, but unmistakable. 3 forearms reached into frame from the bottom edge, hands lifted toward a pale horizon. No faces, no words, only orientation. Forward. The EXIF core had been stripped by prior overwrites, but residual markers were enough to place the file near the day of departure. Families were shown the fragment privately, away from cameras and lights. The presentation included an explanation of process and limits. Nothing was promised beyond what the pixels could bear. Some details brought comfort, others reopened time. The choice to look was left to them. Official findings were delivered in plain language. Confirmed: the abandoned campsite. The clean, non-serrated cut. Mica transfer indicating ascent. Non-local fuel residue revealing post-vanish supply. Concealed dry camp with disciplined short burn fire use. Not style from older SAR instruction recurring near the renewed signal. Hydrophone captures of intentional percussive patterns during wind lulls. Tally marks reducing from 3 to 2 to 1. A mechanical striker placed to activate at specific flows within the original search grid. And the recovered partial image of 3 hands pointing forward. Undetermined. The precise sequence of separation, the origin of resupply, and the identity of whoever installed the striker. The report closed with a sentence adopted early in the review. Where the record ends, the file remains open. One system's change entry followed rather than many. Passive ridge repeaters were added to patrol infrastructure, low-power listeners that log narrowband patterns during quiet hours. Hydroacoustic sweeps became a scheduled tool in high granite corridors where water carries sound better than air. Permit briefings were updated to reference off-trail illusions, stone-hopping risks at night, and the need for redundant timekeeping when device clocks drift. The intent was specific: fewer gaps between what hikers plan and what terrain permits. Artifacts were returned as policy allows. The SD fragment was offered back with copies archived under chain of custody. Personal notebooks and non-evidentiary items went home by courier. At the family's request, A small marker was placed near a stand of laurel above the first campsite, uninscribed, set flush with soil, meant to be found only by those already searching. The canyon remains as it was, a place where wind bends sound and water moves it farther than expected. No ceremony accompanied the final sweep. Radios were checked and stowed. Flags were pulled. Footprints faded along the approach as afternoon shadow reached the creek. On the last page of the operations log, the closing line matched the first. Search concluded. Monitoring continuous. The scanner that once caught 3 short, 3 long, 3 short was powered down at base and set to record overnight on an unmanned channel. Nothing further was heard. The story ends where the work can honor it, with what has been proven, and with the understanding that unanswered does not mean unattended. If this story kept you listening, make sure to subscribe for more cases told carefully and clearly. And in the comments, share one trail safety rule you live by. Your tip might help someone else tomorrow.